Good evening, dear Arundhati Roy, dear surveillant, dear Monsieur Gallimard, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear readers and lovers of literature. It is a great occasion that we come together tonight to celebrate the writing of Arundhati Roy on behalf of the 45th European Essay Prize for Lifetime Achievement for her French translation of her compilation of essays, Azadi, Liberté, Fascisme, Fiction. It is to me a moment of hope to come together on behalf of the written word here on this event and to have Arundhati Roy join us in this room tonight. It is an excellent choice of the jury to award the 45th European Essay Prize to Arundhati Roy. And while I can't grasp the complexities of her fiction and non-fiction in such a short address, and you all, as passionate readers, will anyway be deep into her body of work, I can try to explain why this choice, to me, is a sign of hope. I got to know about Arundhati Roy when I was a schoolgirl, finishing school. As many young girls worldwide, I read The God of Small Things and found stories in there that gave shelter to emotions, pointed out injustices, and found a language for feelings of bonding and loss. Reading about Arundhati's characters made me, a working-class girl in the suburbia of southern Germany, connect to the inner life of Rahel and Esther. Arundhati's capacity to weave a reader's inner life to that of their characters, of her characters, is a rare gift. Decades later, I might not remember every detail of the story I read, every place where it is said, but I can never forget the atmosphere I was in while reading Arundhati's book. Once I read an interview of a German theater director who was asked if she could name a writer who writes in a way that she would like to direct. She answered, Arundhati Roy. I immediately understood what she meant. The plasticity of her writing is extraordinary. As a reader, you don't only immerse in her characters and stories. There comes a moment you are all wrapped up in her imagery, and that feeling is hard to forget. It's almost that feeling that J.D. Salinger describes in The Catcher in the Rye, where his character says, some books, when you finish them, you feel so close to the writer, it feels like you could close the book and call the writer like a friend. With Arundhati, though, after you read her books, it never felt like you could just call her. It rather felt like, well, I would really like to call, but would I want to disrupt this imaginative power that creates her work? A work that is both part of this world and yet offers a glimpse into something deeper. It is not a coincidence that the Ministry of Utmost Happiness is set on a cemetery in Delhi. Arundhati Roy brings us to places most of us fear, both in her fiction and non-fiction. While many are busy distinguishing between the two genres she writes in, she herself is mastering the answer to this in her own perfect way. She said in an interview, well, both are part of me, both are part of the way I think. The non-fiction I have written has always been an urgent intervention. And over 20 years, that is a special kind of narrative. I'm always telling stories. I would like to dare to go one step further. Both are not only part of what she thinks, both are part of the way she is. When she held the Sebald lecture, she pointed out that there was one thing where she didn't agree with him. I'm quoting her now. He said he hated the novel. I love the novel. Maybe I am the novel. In both genres, if both genres are part of her, then she, maybe, is also the essay. She embodies her writing. But more than anything else, there's a moral architecture underneath her essay and novels that speaks of the injustices of the state of the world we live in. And yet it is not so-called moralistic writing, as some people like to put it. No, Arundhati is telling the stories of people she sees around herself. And too many of those that she sees are not being seen. She's an observer, observing and telling stories. And it is up to us as readers to make the judgment after we see what she has seen and told through her words. She's a critic, sharp as a knife. When, with a hint of a smile, she questions concepts that are consensually en vogue just by asking, what is really so post about post-colonialism? One of her biggest strengths, I think, is that in this time, where we have to defend facts against fake news, she has the courage to still defend the story, the narrative, the feelings, the imagination. Many of us have come to believe the only way to counter fake narratives is to give more data, more facts, and thus leave emotions and storytelling all too often to nationalistic or right-wing movements worldwide. Arundhati has the courage to stick to stories as a means of telling the truth about the world we live in, even and particularly when it's about nonfiction. She keeps telling a story with different tools. She's not an academic, the academic kind of way, and yet her writing offers deep insight about the state of the world we live in. When I saw her at the literary festival in Berlin some years ago, she was asked whether she was a writer or an activist. She said she doesn't like that label. It would actually take some of the power away from her literature. She is not an activist. She is definitely a writer. She's one of our best. There came the day when I was luckily no longer in school, but a writer and journalist myself. When I had the luck to have quite a successful podcast in Germany, because of which I dared to call her and disrupt her imaginative work. She agreed to be my guest and talk to me about freedom, since there are so few spaces one really does this nowadays, she said. Two things, among many others, I learned from our conversation that I would like to share tonight with you. In my podcast, which is called Freiheit Deluxe, she poignantly defined herself and what kind of writer she is. I am someone who will always believe in the power of the written word. You can make as many videos as you like and as many films as you like, but ultimately, the danger that a writer poses is a different kind of danger, and that is my danger. I was stunned how somebody with such a gentleness in the way she speaks and such a great amount of empathy can be so decisive about her willingness to speak up. She quietly but determinedly declared that she is willing to scare people, not any kind of people, but those who try to silence others for the sake of their own powers, their own influence, their own selfish wealth, or their own status. Her gentleness reminded me that we can fight without turning into our enemies, that we can keep our own faces and voices, that we can be armed differently if we accept our own vulnerability. Maybe the biggest lesson in her books, aside from the facts you learn and the stories you get told, is to understand Arundhati Roy's willingness to allow for pain, to allow herself to feel the suffering that many try to silence, without shutting out the outside world, just to remain in a cozy, comfortable place. So, why is this such a night of hope for me? Here is the other thing I learned during the recording. It happened accidentally, but I think it's telling its own story. My team at the radio station is always hyper nervous about having a clear, perfect sound on the recording. No disturbing noises whatsoever. Everything has to be perfect when it comes to sound. 60 episodes we managed without any disturbing noises whatsoever. With Arundhati, we tried to do our best as always. She was sitting in her apartment in Delhi when my team suddenly asked her, "Can you shut the window, please? It is very loud in the back." Arundhati said, "The window is closed." "Well, but we can hear the streets, the noise, the traffic." "Well, that's Delhi. I can't do more now. This is how it is." Arundhati's is the only episode that is not perfect sound-wise, that has the noise of the city of my guest. To me, this seems an ideal metaphor for the kind of writer that Arundhati Roy is, for the danger she poses. The more one tries to create a world where you leave out the disruptions, the calmer she will sit there in the midst of it and let you know. This is the world we live in, and I will tell you about it. You can't shut out the unwanted noise. You have to listen to the world as it is, not as you would like it to be. This is what gives me hope tonight, that we still live in a world where this is appreciated, that we are listening to her urgent intervention and can't shut ourselves off, that there still is a writer as gifted as Arundhati Roy, willing and able to stay open in spite of it all. Congratulations, dear Arundhati.